Welcome to part 2 of the Pacifica console replacement. If you're looking for the disassembly, feel free to click here and you can go directly to part 1 where we took out the lowboy standard console from this 2017 Pacifica. We're going to continue on today with installing the mid-grade console. And just as a comparison, you saw this in the part 1 video, but this is side by side of the standard console versus the mid-grade console that we are about to put in. As you can see, it is very much different. The arm is much higher. You have that pass-through in the middle from the front to back. You also have this little tray here at the top, and then there is also a drawer here in the back, which allows the back passengers a couple of cup holders as well once this goes into place. Now, just as continued reminders, the mid-grade console does require a different bracket than the standard console, so make sure you have that part already before you start this project. It is a metal one as compared to the plastic one that we had previously. Now, the mid-grade console also has a couple of different screws that are required on the side here in order to secure the console to the bracket. The bracket itself is going to go into the console floor, just the same as the previous bracket. Now, one thing that I noticed here, there's a couple of caveats. One is that this metal bracket is stamped with a front designation and arrows pointing that way. But as we see here, there is actually a little hole in the bracket that doesn't quite line up with this plastic tab in the middle, unless you have the front pointing backwards, in which case it does mesh up, and all the holes do seem to sync up for later on. A second thing that I noted here was, when I ordered the screws, it was based on the part numbers that Chrysler had given me. But when I did a test fitment just before installing the console, I noticed that these screws, A, were not long enough to bite into the metal, and then B, the screws themselves were not of the right threading. So what I ended up doing was, I went to my parts bin and I grabbed a couple of these screws that were meant for like TV brackets to hang TVs onto the wall. I had a couple of different sizes. I know these come in metric sizes. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I did a test fitment there. They seemed to screw into the metal fine, and they were long enough. So I went ahead and used these different parts here, as opposed to the screws that I had ordered from Chrysler. So as you'll remember, when we took down the original console, we popped out this electric tray here, and literally popped out because it's just held in by plastic tabs, right? We had unplugged the two sockets there, so all we had to do is kind of push it back in to this mid-grade console, and we're just going to reuse that part. Alrighty, as a reminder, when we took off the plastic bracket from the lowboy console, there was this electronic device underneath it, which is the key receiver for the keyless entry and the keyless start. Right? It had a spot in the plastic bracket from before, but there's not really a place for it in the metal bracket. As a result, I had to kind of figure out, okay, where am I going to put this? One, so that the receiver works as well as it used to, and two, so that it doesn't rattle around while I'm driving and create unnecessary noise. So the workaround, the fix that I decided on, was getting some hook and loop fasteners or Velcro fasteners and essentially just sticking it on top of the electronic module box here. So, I peeled off the back. I put half of it on the back of the receiver, and then there's really not, like I said, there's not a place for it to go, so I just decided to put it at the front end of the receiver here. So I've put the hooks there on one side, the loops are on the back of the device, and I just stuck it on top there. All right. Now, there's a couple of reasons for me doing it this way. But the primary one is that I did not want this to be underneath the metal bracket, right? As we know from high school science, metal is not conductive to radio waves. So by having it underneath the metal bracket could potentially impair the distance that you can use the remote, the keyless fobs from. Here I'm just going to be putting the bracket back in. I'm using the same 4 screws that were used to hold the previous plastic bracket. If you saw the first video, you'll know that the carpet was a bit in the way, so I'm having to kind of wedge it back underneath the carpet in certain places. And I'm doing that with just a plastic trim tool. So I'm going to continue using those same 4 nuts that I took off from the disassembly. And I'm just going to thread them on. And once I have them threaded on and it looks like it's going to be a good fit, I'm going to take out my 10mm socket wrench and just tighten them into the floor. Like I was talking about earlier, you'll see that now that the bracket is in place, it is not covering the key fob receiver, and that was very important to me. It took a little bit of jerry-rigging to get everything in, get the screws underneath the carpet, but still be reachable by the 10mm socket wrench. But once we had all of that set up, then it was just a matter of getting everything tightened up, and then we were good to go on the brackets. Clean up a little bit, and all right, we're ready for our next step here. So, obligatory hand slap of the bracket, make sure it's not going anywhere. So at this point, I'm just going to sneak in the back, and I'm going to grab the console, and I'm going to slide it in from the back, right? There we go. So I popped it in there. It's just going to go straight in the front there. Of course, before you put it straight into the floor, you're going to want to reconnect your 12 volt as well as your USB power. Remember, so they were just little clips, right? And I figured out that the easier way to do this was to just come in from the floorboard side of the driver side and clip them in that way is a better vantage point ultimately and much easier to do. So once we got those 2 clipped back in there, and they are pretty snug connectors, remember that the connectors only fit in one and not the other, so you don't really have a chance of plugging them in incorrectly. If it fits, then that's where the connector needs to go. Alright, so now that I have it, the electronics back together, then it's just a matter of sliding it forward and making sure that it bites the 2 screws there in the front, and then just kind of setting it down in the back on top of that metal bracket. So from here, it's just a matter of putting on those 2 nuts back in the front. Once again, this is the 10mm socket wrench once I get these pre-threaded. And then there's going to be another 4 screws, those 4 screws in the back to secure the console to the metal bracket. Now that'll be for the follow-up video because that actually takes a little bit of time to get to and takes a little bit of contorting to get underneath the seats. So if you're looking for that, stay tuned with us. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and that way you'll know when part 3 comes up, which is going to show you how to remove the seat rails in order to get to the screws and be able to secure it in. Thanks for watching. See you again next time.